The screaming started at dawn. Just like every other day on Vexor 9, it cut through the artificial air like a blade, mixing with the constant buzz of dying neon signs and the groans of metal that had given up trying to hold itself together. This place had once been something proud, a research colony where brilliant minds pushed the boundaries of science. Now it was nothing more than a rotting carcass spinning around a dying red giant star. The star itself looked sick, bloated, and angry, casting everything in a bloody light that made even the cleanest surfaces look stained. Vexor 9 had long ago stopped caring whether its people lived or died. The gravity worked when it felt like it, humming unevenly through levels that had been patched together. With whatever scraps could be found and a lot of desperate hope. The deeper you went into the trade wards, the worse it got. Neon lights buzzed, louder and brighter, fighting a losing battle against the rust, the filth, and the blood that never seemed to wash away, no matter how hard anyone scrubbed. It was as if the station itself had soaked up too much pain to ever be clean again, and right in the heart of all this misery, beneath a flickering sign that had once proudly announced Ether Gateway, but now just blinked fate in broken letters. Rhea knelt on the cold metal platform. Her hands were bound tight behind her back. The rope had rubbed her wrists raw, and she could feel the warm wetness of blood where it cut deepest. Her bones showed through skin that had once been considered sacred among her people. The Athalari had worshipped the way her violet skin caught starlight, the way it seemed to glow from within during their most holy ceremonies. Now that same skin just made her more valuable at auction. Her knees pressed against the grated steel platform, each tiny hole digging into her flesh. Every breath she took tasted like copper pennies and rotting meat. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, engine fuel, and something else, something that might have been hope, dying slowly. Above her, voices rose and fell like hungry birds circling a fresh kill. They were eager and cruel, placing bets on what would happen to her next. She didn't need to look up to know what she'd see. Faces twisted with the kind of excitement that came from watching someone else's pain. She didn't lift her head. She couldn't bear to see them again. The first time they had stripped her down in front of a crowd. Her heart had hammered so hard she thought it might burst right out of her chest. She had shaken like a leaf in a storm, tears streaming down her face as strange hands poked and prodded her like she was a piece of meat at market. Now her heart barely stirred. There was no dignity left to lose, no shame left to feel. She had been hollowed out, scraped clean of everything that had once made her human. Her name was Rhea Veeler of the Athalari High Court. Once, that name had opened doors across 3 star systems. Nobles had bowed when she entered a room. Children had been taught her genealogy in their history lessons. Now, that same name meant nothing except one more thing for them to take away from her. Lot 17. The auctioneer's voice cut through the crowd like a rusty knife. Female bioluminescent cast, fertility confirmed but sterilized per seller request. No previous claims, pre-trained, responsive under proper command. Bidding starts at 2,000 credits. Rhea's skin prickled as the harsh lights above made her violet tone shine like a beacon. Once that soft glow had drawn reverence from her. People, they had called her star-touched and light-bearer. Now it just drew price evaluations from men who saw her as nothing more than an expensive toy. Her white hair hung around her face in dirty, tangled ropes. It had once flowed past her waist in elaborate ceremonial braids, woven with threads that sparkled like captured starlight. Those braids had taken hours to create. Each one a work of art reserved only for the most sacred bonding ceremonies. Now her hair stuck to her cheeks like wet ash, matted with dirt and blood and things she tried not to think about. 3,000. Someone shouted from the crowd. The voice was male, harsh, too close for comfort. 4,000. Came another voice. 5, I'll take just the ears. Laughter rippled through the crowd like poison. Rhea did not move. She had learned long ago that moving only made things worse. Instead, she focused on the memory, cool water running over her feet in the palace gardens. Stars visible through the crystal dome of her tower before the war began. Before the medical procedure that had stolen her future, before her husband's voice had changed from silk to wire. The brand on her right shoulder itched constantly. It was still healing, still raw and angry red. He had made sure it would scar deep, a permanent mark so that no one could ever forget what she had become. Discarded property, used goods. It's broken. 7,000, 10,000. Let's see what kind of sounds she makes. The bidding continued, voices rising and falling like a sick song. Rhea closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be warm, to be safe, to be loved. And then silence fell like a hammer blow. It was sharp and complete, so sudden that even Rhea blinked in surprise. That kind of quiet didn't happen at slave auctions. There was always noise, always shouting and laughing, and the sound of credits changing hands. 20,000. The voice didn't belong here. It didn't carry the oily tone of a sadist getting his kicks, or the sharp edge of a trafficker making a business deal. It was quiet, measured, almost tired, like someone who had seen too much and felt too little. Slowly, carefully, Rhea raised her eyes. A single figure stood at the edge of the crowd, separated from the other bidders by more than just distance. He was broad-shouldered, wrapped in a long coat that had seen better days. The leather was greased and darkened with age, and his hood was pulled low enough to cast shadows across his face. Human, that much was clear from his build, his stance. His skin was weathered and tan, like he spent a lot of time under different suns. His jaw was rough with several days' worth of stubble, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too much brightness for too many years. One gloved hand rested casually on the grip of a pulse rifle slung across his back. Not drawn, not threatening, just resting there like it belonged. Like he was so comfortable with violence that he didn't need to make a show of it. But what struck Rhea most was what he wasn't doing. He wasn't leering at her like the others. He wasn't gloating over his winning bid or already planning what he'd do with his new purchase. He just stood there, staring at her with eyes that seemed to see too much and feel too little. The auctioneer blinked in confusion, clearly thrown off. His rhythm? Confirmed. 20,000 credits. Final call going once. Someone in the crowd muttered something about dropping that kind of money on used goods and probably defective anyway. But the words seemed to bounce off the stranger like rain off stone, going twice. The man, Malik Jarrow, though Rhea didn't know his name yet, didn't move, didn't even blink. Sold. The deal clicked through the local network with a sound like breaking glass. Malik stepped forward with the same unhurried pace he'd maintained throughout the entire auction. He didn't reach for Rhea, didn't snap his fingers or bark out orders. Instead, he simply pulled out a dented data chip and handed it to the handler, murmuring something too low for anyone else to hear. Then he turned toward the docking bay exit and started walking. Rhea's chains released with a sharp hiss and clatter that made her flinch. This was the moment, she thought. This was when it would begin again. The pain, the commands, the slow grinding away of whatever pieces of herself she had managed to hold on to. But the strike never came. No hand clamped down on her wrist to drag her along. No shock prod sparked to life to force her compliance. No leash appeared around her neck. Just a glance over his shoulder, brief. Not impatient, not cruel, but not particularly kind either. He walked, and God help her, she followed, because what else was there to do? The corridors of Vexor 9 twisted through the station's belly like the intestines of some massive dying beast. The walls pulsed with advertisement lights that hurt. To look at directly, promising pleasures and products that no one could afford and everyone desperately wanted. Muffled screams echoed from behind sealed doors, mixing with the bass thump of music that had been playing for so long it had become part of the station's heartbeat. Children with hollow eyes and too thin faces watched them pass. Too hungry, too. Beg, but not quite hungry enough to die. They pressed themselves against the walls like shadows, tracking every movement with the calculating gaze of scavengers. Half-machine beggars sat in doorways, their organic parts rotting while their mechanical pieces sparked and whirred. They whispered blessings in dead languages, offering prayers to gods who had abandoned this place long ago if they had ever been here at all. A woman with skin like polished mirrors sold what she called artificial wounds from a crate made of yellowed bone. Each cut was supposedly crafted to look like it came from a specific type of weapon, perfect for those who wanted to seem more dangerous than they actually were. A woman with skin like polished mirrors sold what she called artificial wounds from a crate made of yellowed bone. Each cut was supposedly crafted to look like it came from a specific type of weapon, perfect for those who wanted to seem more dangerous than they actually were. Vexor 9 didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was, a carcass picked clean every day, only to have fresh meat thrown on top for tomorrow's feeding frenzy. And through it all, Malik Jarrow didn't flinch. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going and had no doubt he'd get there safely. His hand never moved toward his weapon, his pace never quickened, his eyes never darted nervously from side to side. Rhea watched him from 3 steps behind, analyzing every movement like her life depended on it, which it probably did. His coat was patched in at least 6 places, each repair done with care rather than speed. A faded insignia peeked out from one of the seams, 3 concentric stars surrounding a broken blade. It meant nothing to her. But something about the symbol made her pause. There was a weight to it, a history that seemed to press against her thoughts, even though she couldn't understand why. They reached a rusted docking corridor that smelled like fuel and desperate dreams. His ship waited at the end of the pier, older than he was and twice as stubborn. Was freighter class, built for the outer rim where things broke down more often than they worked, and replacement parts were worth their weight in gold. The hull plating didn't match patches of different metals welded together in a pattern that spoke of emergency repairs made in the middle of nowhere with whatever could be found. One engine was slightly off balance, still vibrating from the cooling process, humming a song that was just a little bit wrong. The names stenciled above the loading ramp read Althea in letters that had been repainted. So many times they were thick as frosting. Rhea had never heard the name before, and yet something about it gave her pause. It sounded ... familiar somehow, like a half-remembered dream or a song her mother had sung when she was very small. Malik keyed the hatch, and it opened without a sound, a luxury on a station where everything screamed when it moved. He didn't look back at her, didn't say get in or move or hurry up. He just walked inside like he expected her to follow. She stood on the threshold, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. Was this another trick? Some slow, elaborate game before the real breaking began? Hunger overruled caution, and the promise of clean air pulled her. Forward she stepped inside. The difference was immediate and startling. The air was cleaner. Not fresh exactly, but warmer and more real than the recycled atmosphere of the station. There was still the smell of engine grease and metal, but underneath it was something that almost smelled like home. Real gravity stabilized her steps. No longer the uneven pull of Vexor 9's dying systems. The floor hummed beneath her feet with the steady rhythm of a healthy ship. A sound that spoke of maintenance and care and someone who took pride in keeping their vessel running. Malik said nothing as he led her through 2 narrow corridors. Past a closed weapons locker that looked like it had seen heavy use, past a flickering status console that displayed readouts in 3 different languages, and into a small crew chamber, not a cell. That was the first thing that struck her. There were no locks on the door, no chains hanging from the walls, no restraint systems built into the furniture. Just a cot bolted securely to the wall, a small hygiene unit in the corner, and a cabinet labeled medical in neat, careful handwriting. She turned in slow, uncertain steps, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Where were the manacles? The monitoring. Devices, the control collar that would shock her if she stepped out of line. Instead, Malik reappeared, holding a blanket. It was thick and dark blue, with a faint scent of soap clinging to its fibers. He held it out to her, not shoved it at her, not dropped it on the floor for her to pick up. Just offered it like he might offer a drink to a guest. Her hands didn't move at first. They shook too much, and her mind couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't how things worked. Masters didn't give gifts without expecting payment. They didn't offer comfort without demanding submission in return. Her eyes met his for just a second, and she searched desperately for the hunger she'd grown accustomed to seeing in men's faces, the pleasure they took in her fear, the anticipation of what they planned to do with her. There was nothing, just distance and something buried beneath that. Something unreadable and carefully controlled. She took the blanket with trembling fingers. He turned and left without another word. No door sealed behind him, no locks engaged, no threats issued about what would happen if she tried to escape, for several heartbeats. She just stood there clutching the fabric in deadened hands. She didn't trust it, didn't trust him, didn't trust the situation, didn't trust her own perception of what was happening. But her legs gave out, the cot was soft, and she found herself sinking down onto it with a sob she hadn't known was building in her chest. She sat, then curled into the blanket, pulling it tight around her shoulders. Its warmth stung her skin like sunlight after too long in the dark, and for the first time in months, she felt something that might have been safety. The next hour unfolded like a dream she was afraid to wake up from. She found the hygiene unit. Tucked into the corner, not just a basic waste disposal, but an actual shower with water that flowed steady and warm. Not cold, not scalding hot, just perfectly. Wonderfully normal. She stood under the spray for longer than she should have, watching the water run pink and then brown and finally clear as it washed away layers of blood and shame and memory. Her hands shook as she scrubbed at her skin with soap that smelled like nothing more complicated than cleanliness. Her own reflection in the small mirror frightened her. Low cheeks, sunken eyes, a woman she didn't recognize staring back at her like a ghost. She dried herself with a clean cloth from the cabinet, wrapped the blanket back around her shoulders like armor, and stepped into the main room. A tray of food waited on the small table. Real food, soup that steamed gently, something that looked like bread. Protein blocks that weren't moldy or crawling with things she didn't want to identify. Basic survival rations, but clean and safe and more than she'd seen in one place. Longer than she could remember. She stared at it for too long, waiting for the catch. Food was never free. There was always a price, always a demand that came with it. But hunger won out over caution. And she lunged for the tray like a starving animal. She ate too quickly, hands shaking, teeth clicking against the spoon. She choked, cursed herself, gagged, tried again. A small part of her expected Malik to come storming in to scold her for her lack of manners, to gloat over how desperate she'd become to finally reveal what he really wanted from her. No one came later when her stomach was full enough to think clearly. She found herself staring at a red light blinking on the console near the door. For a moment, panic flared. Was it an alarm? It signaled that she'd done something wrong? But it was just a low battery warning. Nothing more threatening than a reminder to replace a power cell. Malik had left a medical pack by the bed while she was eating. Inside were burn salve, blood clotters, painkillers, everything she needed to tend to the wounds she'd been ignoring for weeks. She applied them with slow, deliberate care, marveling at the simple luxury of healing without fear of making things worse by the time exhaustion finally claimed her. She was curled on her side with the blanket pulled up to her chin. Her eyes were still wide, her body still alert for the sound of footsteps in the corridor. They never came. The engine purred gently beneath her, constant and comforting in a way that unnerved her. She had grown so accustomed to chaos and noise and violence that peace felt wrong somehow, like a trap waiting to spring, and before sleep finally dragged her under. One thought returned to her, quiet as a whisper in the dark. He didn't touch me. Not once. She didn't know what that meant yet, but it terrified her more than anything else that had happened. And against her will, against every instinct that screamed at her to stay alert and suspicious. It also made her wonder, who was this? Human, and what did he want from someone who was no longer worth anything? Chapter 2. The second night aboard the Althea was quieter than the first. Such a thing was possible. No alarms shrieked in the distance. No restraints cut into her wrists. No voices barked orders in harsh alien dialects, demanding compliance with threats of pain and worse. Just the low, steady hum of engines running clean and true, the soft pulse of the ship's systems working like breath in the background. The air carried faint notes of oxidized metal and machine grease, but underneath it was something less expected. The warmth of clean linen, the comfort of old soap, maybe even the gentle aroma of tea brewing somewhere in the ship's depths. Rhea sat on the edge of her cot, barefoot, wrapped in the thick blue blanket Malik had given her. She hadn't asked for it, hadn't asked for anything really, and yet it was there. Warm, heavy, safe in a way that made her chest ache with something she didn't dare name. She stared at the floor. Toes curled slightly against the textured panels. Muscles still coiled with the instinct to flinch at every sound. Freedom was a concept she didn't quite believe in yet, but it lingered at the edge of her understanding like a word spoken in a dream. Just out of reach, her body still braced with every distant noise. Her pulse still spiked when doors hissed, open, even softly, even here where no one had hurt her yet. And yet nothing had happened. No one had touched her. No one had even raised their voice. The man, Malik Jarrow, had left her completely alone. He hadn't tried to strip her down with his gaze or make subtle comments about his ownership rights. He hadn't lingered in doorways watching her, hadn't found excuses to brush against her in the narrow corridors. Instead, he had offered her warmth, food, and space. Which, in her experience, could only mean one thing. It was a trick. The most elaborate, patient, cruel trick she had ever encountered, but a trick nonetheless. And yet she hadn't tried to leave. She could have. There were airlocks and emergency pods, corridors he hadn't bothered to lock or even monitor as far as she could tell. She had noticed them, counted them, memorized their locations during her careful exploration of the ship. She could have run, could have vanished into the void or taken her chances on whatever planet they passed next. But still she stayed because something about this silence, the way it didn't demand anything from her, didn't press against her with expectations or threats, felt more unsettling than actively threatening. She stood slowly, stretching limbs that ached from too much disuse and not enough food. Her body was a map of recent history written in bruises and scars. Her ribs still bore the purple-yellow stains of confinement, finger-shaped marks that had faded but not disappeared. Her collarbone itched where the brand had been applied and was still healing, still tender to the touch. She touched the scar reflexively, then dropped her hand with a sharp motion. No, she wouldn't think about that now. She wouldn't think about him, about the ceremony where they had marked her as property, about the way he had smiled while she screamed. She needed water. And maybe, against her better judgment, she needed conversation, even if it was dangerous. Even if it revealed more about her situation than she was prepared to handle. She moved silently through the corridor toward the common area. Every sense, alert, posture still guarded despite the growing familiarity of her surroundings. The Althea was an older freighter, utilitarian in design but maintained with obvious care. Its narrow halls were lined with functional steel and insulated panels, exposed power junctions that had been patched and repatched with the patience of someone who understood that small repairs prevented big failures. Nothing flashy. Nothing meant to impress visitors or intimidate prisoners. But there was personality in the details that made her pause and look closer. A photograph magnetized to the wall near the galley showed what might have been an earthborn dog with ridiculous ears and a smile so wide it seemed to take up half its face. A plant grew in a cracked ceramic pot, its leaves green and healthy despite being light years from any sun. A set of tools was arranged with meticulous care beneath a flickering light panel. Labeled in both human text and alien glyphs, she didn't recognize he lived here. Really lived here, not just passed through or used it as a base of operations. That struck her as odd. Men like Malik, quiet, functional, hard-edged, they didn't usually leave traces of themselves lying around. They passed through places like ghosts, taking what they needed and moving on before anyone could get attached or ask questions. They didn't water plants or keep pictures of pets or learn alien languages well enough to label their tools. The common room was dimly lit when she reached it. The stars outside casting long lines of motion across the main viewport as they traveled through hyperspace. Malik sat at the navigation console with his legs stretched out and his hands behind his head, watching the drift of the cosmos without saying a word. He didn't startle when she entered the room, didn't turn dramatically or reach for a weapon, or even seem particularly surprised to see her. Just glanced in her direction with the same calm attention he might give to checking a gauge reading. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low and carefully neutral. "I don't sleep much anymore," she replied, the words coming out more honestly than she had intended. "Nightmares." "No," she said after a moment, "just memory." A pause passed between them, comfortable in its lack of pressure. He gestured toward the galley with a slight nod of his head. "Food's in the warmer. Help yourself." She hesitated, every instinct screaming that this was the moment when the trap would spring. When he would demand payment for his generosity, when the mask would slip and reveal the monster underneath. "I didn't drug anything," he added, not mockingly or defensively, just offering a flat truth without offense. Like he understood her fear and didn't take it personally. Rhea stepped forward on unsteady legs, retrieved a sealed ration bowl, and placed it into the reheating module. The machine hummed to life, releasing a quiet cloud of steam laced with the faint scent of grains and root vegetables. Simple food, but real and clean and safe. Proteins. She didn't realize how hungry she was until the smell hit. Her stomach clenched painfully when it was done. She took the bowl and sat at the far end of the room, keeping her back tough wall. She didn't eat right. Away just stared into the meal, gathering herself. "You're not afraid of me." She said finally, "No." Malik replied, "Should I've killed people?" "So have I." She looked up, his expression didn't change. "Most people lie when I say that." She said, "Most people are afraid of the truth. I'm not." She studied him, Wate. "You then tired," he said simply, "but not stupid. I know you're dangerous, distant, mean. I think you're a threat. Why not because you still flinch at door sounds?" She blinked, startled by hypocrisy. It wasn't cruelty, it was observation, sharp, precise, and because, Hetty, if you wanted to kill me, you would have tried the moment you saw the medkit was unlocked. She didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow bite of her food. 'Twas bland, textured, slightly overcooked, but it was hot, solid, real tears prick-wrecked. The corners of her eyes before she could stop them, she blinked hard and swallowed. Malik didn't comment, just turned his attention back to the stars. After a while, she spoke again. "You don't know what I am. I know you're not what they said you were." He said, "That's not the same thing." "No," he admitted, "but it's a start." She stared at him for a long moment, then with a quiet voice, "I was born into the aphilarinable caste. Bioluminescent, genetic line, spiritual and diplomatic bloodline. I waist-trained to negotiate peace treaties before I was 13, at 17. I was bonded to Adurk's heir to strengthen a political accord between our systems, and then I failed him. Or he failed you." She looked away. "He wanted a legacy. I couldn't give it, so he took everything." "Else silence again. Do you miss it?" Malik asked. "Legacy, know the power, the position, being someone important." "Really, thought for a long time, no," she said at last, "but I miss being believed." That landed between them with more weight than either expected. When she stood, he didn't press her with more questions, but as she turned to leave, his voice came softly behind her. Rella. She stopped. I don't care who you were before. He said you're here now and you're safe. That's what matters. Her throat tightened. And as he returned to her room for the first time in years, her heart didn't raise eight very noise. She slept not easily, but deeply, and in her dreams no one touched her. Without permission, and for the first time she woke up wanting to stay the silence aboard. Althea was the kind that could either soothe a person or suffocate them to Rhea. It did both. She stood alone in her small quarters. One hand resting on the curved wall of the ship, the metal felt cold beneath her fingertips, pulsing faintly with life as the freighter drifted through deep space. It reminded her of something, of long halls and polished stone, the hum of ore and ancient walls back home. Only this wasn't home, and nothing about her life was ancient anymore. It was all raw, unsteady. She wasn't sure yet if she hated that she'd slept again, that Madet 2 nights in a row, and that was a problem, or maybe it was progress. Her instincts were still undecided. In a mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her skin, violet with soft undertones of silver, was no longer dull with grime, though the burn mark on her shoulders still throbbed. Her long white hair, no brushed and loosely tied, cascaded down her back in a way that used to carry weight in her culture. Now it just felt like a memory she didn't know what to do with. She touched the scar above her collarbone where the sterilization had been done. Silent, clinical, final, that waste moment. She stopped being useful the moment her husband had discarded her like malfunctioning tech. She forced her hand down. No, not now, not again. She stepped out of her quarters and made her way toward the main deck. The corridors of Althea had started to feel familiar. Softest of pressure valves, the low were of old stabilizers. The rhythmic later of something loose in the ceiling panel that no one had bothered to fix. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't luxurious, but it was honest. She found Malik seated in the pilot's chair, one foot propped up, chewing on something unappetizing. Looking from silver-pouched dim lights of the cockpit panels lit his face in flickers. One eye narrowed slightly in thought, the other catching occasional flashes of starlight. From the viewport he glanced back when he heard her steps, but didn't stand. You're up, he said, voice growly from sleep or silence. Didn't hear you get up. I didn't make noise, she said, more automatic than Rudihe's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. Something smaller, fair enough, she approached, slowly wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. Even though the temperature was stable, it was more Habathon comfort now. You always eat things that smell like old boot leather, she asked, wrinkling her nose. Malik looked down at the pouch and shrugged. Tastes better than it smells. Mostly. Once Somish shook her head. I'd rather chew the blanket. He chuckled softly and folded the pouch closed, tossing it into a bin by the console. Suit yourself. The galley stocked with rations, actual food if you feel brave. She perched on a ledge. Bezadeth's secondary nav console. Careful to avoid the exposed wiring, they sat in Salonsos for a while. Not uncomfortable, but not quite companionable either. Like a two strangers on opposite sides of a deep cracked bridge, staring at the Samariver. I keep expecting you to ask questions, she said finally, about what Muhat. I did what I was. Well, I'm not anymore. Malik leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes scanning the data feed scrolling along the monitor. You'll tell him when you want to, he said. That's simple. He glanced sideways at her. Do you want me to demand it? Number a pause, but most people do. I'm not most people. She nodded slowly. You're not. More silence outside it. Viewport, the edge of a debris cloud shimmered. I see fragments of a dead satellite field caught in slow-motion orbit around a collapsed planet, light scattered through the crystals. Like sherds of broken glass suspended in water, Relia found herself staring. It's beautiful, she said softly, only from a distance. He replied, get too close, and until shred you open. Her eyes flicked toward him. Is that a metaphor? He shrugged. Maybe she sat with that for armament. Then asked, where are we going? Fuel station on the edge of the Uralion drift. I need to resupply. You're welcome to stay on board or walk. The way he said it was so casual, it took her a moment to realize it wasn't a threat, it was a genuine offer, no leash. She murmured, never planned on one. She looked at him again. More carefully this time. You really don't expect anything from me, do you? Malik tilted his head. Why would? Because people pay for things expecting something back, and you paid a lot, Hiwaski, for a long moment. Then finally, I didn't pay for you. I paid to stop Ethot auction, the way they laughed, the way you didn't flinch, her breath caught just for a second. You look dead, he said softer. Now, but you weren't. I saw it. You still had fight left. I just didn't want them to take that too. She looked away, staring at her hands. You don't know what I've done, she whispered. Then tell me. She hesitated, then shook her head. Not yet. He didn't push. Instead, he leaned back in the chair and folded his arms. You want to help me? Run diagnostics on a starboard stabilizer? She blinked. Watu said you don't like sitting around waiting to be told. What to do? Prove it? Come work for a second, she thought. He was joking, but his face was calm, open. He meant it. Her hands trembled faintly, as stood not from fear, but from something else. Something like purpose. Nodded once and followed him down the corridor toward the maintenance shaft. They worked side by side in near salons, save for the clink of tools and the hum of core power vibrating through the walls. He showed her the wiring interface, handed her a scanner, didn't correct her once. Even when she fumbled, he waited. You're good at this, he said eventually. I used to be better. She replied, you will be. That stopped her. Not just the words, but the way he said them, without expectation, without pity. Hewan trying to fix her. He was just giving her the space to rebuild later. They sat in the galley again, both sipping from steaming cups of something earthy and sharp, her muscles locked in a way she hadn't felt in years, not from abuse or trauma, but from use. She didn't speak, not right away. But when she did, it was quiet, careful. My name is Rhea Veeler of the Ethelari. Cast. Malik didn't react, didn't flinch. She continued. I was bonded to a political heir, trained as an envoy, groomed for legacy. But I wouldn't give him children, not after the sterilization. Why sterilize? He asked. Gently. To Punishto, prove ownership. I said no once, just once. And he made sure I could never say it again. She looked down at her cup. I thought I'd die on that platform. I was ready to, but you ruined that plan. Malik leaned back, letting her words hang in the air. Good, he said simply, gestured at him, and then for the first time since she'd boarded the ship, she smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. And when she finally slept that night, she didn't dream of chains. She dreamed of circuits and stars, and a man who handed her tools instead of commands. These stars outside the viewport seemed quieter than usual. They moved like slow-burning ghosts across the dark, drifting past Althoy's reinforced hull, as if reluctant to look inside the Humoff. The engines faded beneath the crackle of soft music. A song Malik played sometimes, just old enough to be forgotten by most of the galaxy. Rella didn't understand the language, but the melody carried something tender, something tired. She sat at the small dining table, shoulders wrapped in a thermal shawl she had pieced together from spare fabric and one of Malik's discarded jackets. Her hands were rapidaire, a cup of steeped root tea steam curling up toward her face. She had tasked him to play the music. He hadn't asked her if she wanted it. It had just started, and for some reason it felt right. Malik sat opposite her, unusually still. His cup sat untouched between them. They hadn't spoken much since her admission the night before. Her name, her cast, the weight of what she'd endured. If I'd felt like giving away a secret that still hurt to say aloud, but she'd said it. And he hadn't recoiled in a record while translating. Please try again. He wanted heirs, she continued, and I was willing at first, but when the first attempt ended in failure, they ran scans, found a genetic anomaly, slight but inheritable. His legacy had to be pure, so he ordered sterilization. Ordered it. Malik's gaze didn't leave her. His jaw was tight when I protested. He called it rebellion, treason against the marital contract. I was sentenced to silence. 2 years of confined chambers, no external comms, and then when the treaty he married for no longer held value, He released me into the auction system public libraries. He couldn't be seen killing you. Malik said exactly. She nodded, let the galaxy do it for him. Malik leaned back, arms crossed, his eyes on Tabletop, like he could burn a hole through it. I know what it's like. He said softly, she blinked too bestialized to be used up. And? Thrown aside. She tilted her head. I don't know your story. I know he ran a hand through us. Hare then stood walking to the far wall, their half hidden behind a supply locker. He retrieved a dented metal box. He sat on the table between them and appended it with a slow, deliberate movement inside a handful of Pachas insignias and one faded hollow frame damaged by time but still visible to peoples to in the photo a younger Malik, clean-shaven and smirking, and a taller man with darker skin, buzzed hair, and a lopsided grin. My brother Kane. He said we served together in the forward corps, border cleanup missions, diplomatic escorts, the occasional skirmish back when the Federation still believed in saving things. What happened? Leo's voice, barely above a whisper, command sent us into a broken zone near Zenner's Fall. Said it was routine, just evac and recon, but there was nothing routine about it. Pirate remnants. Black market tech dealers, slave caravans moving faster than the Corps could track found a transport station. Running hot. Kane went in first. He paused, took a breath. There was a mine rigged to the data core motion triggered. We never found who said it. He died pulling a civilian out. She was pregnant. I got her to safety, but the report buried it. No commendation. No record, just a quiet debrief and a transfer out, really as iceburn, they said. I should be proud that one life saved was worth it, but they left his body behind, called it an accessory omission. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say. I left after that. He went on, bought Althea for half her asking price, and ran cargo to places no one else wanted to go, figured if the system was broken, I'd work around it and maybe help someone just once whose household had been thrown away. He looked at her. Then you reminded me of her, the woman he saved, the way she looked at him, like she couldn't believe someone would choose to help. Relia's throat tightened. He sounded like he was worth saving. He was a long silence passed between them, not awkward. Just waited, then she reached out and slowly, carefully placed her hand over his. It wasn't a declaration. Not a promise, just acknowledgement. I'm sorry. She said, hadn't pull away. They sat like that for a moment longer, hands linked lightly between steaming cups and silent Storiason. Malik gently closed the box and stood. Docks coming up in 20 hours. Hesed fuel supplies, minor repairs. You can come ashore or stay, your choice, she nodded. I'll think about it. As he walked out, Rila sat back listening to Thefadine. Echo of his boots on the metal floor. Her heart ached, not just from pain, but from recognition to people, different worlds, same burn marks beneath the skin. That night she dreamed of stars, not the cold, distant kind, but ones lit by memory, sharp with clarity and grief, and in the center of them stood a man with blood on his hands and no expectations in his voice, a man who had chosen to save her, not because she was his, but because she had been no one's for far too long. The lights inside Althea dimmed as the ship adjusted its energy output, rerouting reserve power to the stealth dampeners. Malik stood at the helm, silent, his fingers moving across the console with mechanical precision. Beside him, Rhea sat cross-legged in the co-pilot's chair, a thin thread of concentration drawn tight across her brow. They were approaching Vaughn Station, not a place one went for rest, not unless they had nowhere else to go officially. Vaughn Station didn't exist. It was nothing more than a collapsed mining facility orbiting the fractured remains of the third moon of Haster Prime. Unofficially, it was a haven for the unwanted, the exiled, the dangerous, and those who dealt in information the rest of the galaxy pretended didn't exist. Last chance to change your mind. Malik said, his voice low. I'm not turning back. Relia replied. Her voice had changed these last few days. Strong, gurmer, deliberate. The woman who once flinched at the sound of hissing doors now sat fully upright in a pilot's seat, making decisions with quiet certainty. Malik didn't press her. He simply adjusted their trajectory. We dock quietly, he said. You get what you need, then we vanish, she nodded her fingers tightening around the strip of cloth wrapped around her wrist, once part of the robe she had worn at her weed-in ceremony, now repurposed into something resembling armor. The ship clamped to Docken Bay 9 with a hiss and a metallic groan. The hull vibrated as the airlock sank. Initiated, and the soft blue of the station's interior lights bled into the cockpit. Malik stepped out first, surveying the docking corridor. Every corner stank of rust and recycled earth. Walls were scrawled with graffiti in half a dozen languages, many of them warnings and no credit, no mercy, no memories. Relia followed, her hood drawn low, but her eyes alert. She moved like someone with purpose, now not fear even so. Malik kept close, his right hand resting on the side of his coat with a grip of a compact pulse. Rifle weighted, split up, he muttered, less attention. Tokathes, he handed her a slim comm chip and a data sleeve with a scrambled routing algorithm. Use only if you're cornered. She slid it into the seam of her sleeve, nodded, and disappeared into the crowd. The interior of Vaughn was chaos filtered through. Structure markets overlapped with refugee camps, engineer-strated black market augmentations. Beside priests reciting broken codes, every corridor buzzed with desperation. Raya kept her head down, weaving through bodies, tracking pulses of familiarity. Vestiges of her people's once proud technology embedded into the architecture, here and there, shattered fragments of a past long buried. She reached the uplink hub, a rusted console surrounded by chain link fencing and hall-shuttered vendor stalls. The screen flickered as she tapped the surface. Access denied, restricted channel shed, adjusted the interface, manually bypassing the standard input. She didn't have much time. Her fingers flew across screen. Dirk's holdings encrypted, trace active. She inhaled sharply. They had been here recently. She tried another line of query, her own name encoded Thiwe. Her people had once registered their caste, Relevi Fifth Flame. The screen pulsed a line of data. Unraveled coordinates, the location of the ecliptive. She froze. It was real. She had always believed it was, but now there was in raw numbers hidden behind 7 layers of security code. If Derek got to it first, the galaxy wouldn't bend, it would break, and she had just exposed herself. The screen bust. Static warp had the display warning. Trace detected, remote access activated. Her blood rankled. She spun around and locked eyes with a figure standing just across Thekarider. Not security, not security, not enforcement. Worse, a man in a charcoal gray coat, hands folded behind his back, flanked by 2 bodyguards in armored fists. His face was smooth, unwrinkled, untouched by hardship, but his smile was razor thin and entirely humorless. A pleasure, he said, stepping forward. Lady Viller, you're a difficult woman to track. Relia's spine straightened, her voice, when it came, was sharp. Aldrex. Ah, you remember I wondered if the trauma had raised me? You're Dirk's mouthpiece, she said. His errand boy, his strategic envoy. Aldrex corrected. Titles are everything in this galaxy, aren't they? You've made a mistake coming here. She said, no, you made the mistake. That terminal, he gestured with a flick of his fingers, was monitored. Your query gave us exactly what we needed. She didn't hesitate. She bolted. The corridor erupted. Vendors screamed and scattered as the 2 guards surged forward. Rella ducked, spun, and dashed down a side passage behind boot steps. Thundered. She tapped her sleeve once across the station. Malacumbust. She's compromised, came her voice. Meet at fallback point. Bravo. Malik was already moving. He ducked through back alleys and power conduits, cutting corners. Like a man who had memorized escape routes long before needing them, he reached the fallback point, an old maintenance shaft. Seconds before Rio slammed into him, she was out of breath, pale but alive thereafter. The archive. G gasped. I found it, Malik. The location, it's real. He pulled her behind a blast door. We'll talk later. Behind them, Aldrex's men appeared, weapons razzed. Malik didn't flinch. He threw a flare charge behind him. The tunnel lit up, smoke filled the air. He grabbed Ralia's hand and pulled her into a side chute. The floor vanished beneath them as they slid down a series of emergency shafts, gravity shifting with every twist. They landed hard, stumbled to their feet, and kept running. Don't stop. That had been Errol for years for her, for him, for everyone, caught between past and survival. But this time was different. They reached Althea. Just as security protocols kicked in, Malik slammed Thelak, shut the ship lifted from the dock in seconds, engines roaring inside Thea cockpit. Rhea collapsed in her seat, lungs burning. They know, she said they. Novaridding Malik looked at her then. We beat them to it, he said. She blinked. Hua's calm, focused, already planning the jump. She reached out, grabbing his arm. You don't have to keep doing this for me. I'm not, he replied. I'm doing it with you. Her breath hitched. No one had ever said that to her before, not for her, with her. It meant everything. She nodded slowly. Set the course. The archive can't fall into their hands. Malik smiled. Grimly, it went as the ship surged into light speed. Rella stared out into the stars. No longer running, not anymore. Now they were going to claim what was hers and Makasia the rest of the galaxy. Couldn't use it to burn the future, and if Aldrex thought this was the end of her story, he had no idea. Who real Liathoner had become. Sol Meridian was a place that did no text on most maps. No one went there intentionally, not unless they were desperate, foolish, or hunting ghosts. Its coordinates were protected behind layers of encryption and myths scattered through fragmented archives. Old guild registries and religious riddles spoken in dead dialects, but Rhea had always known. It was real. She could feel it in her bones, like Shea compass hidden inside. Her blood guiding her toward the truth she was born to carry. Now it stretched before them, vast and lightless, a void nested. Inside a system-wide silence, Malik stood at the helm. His hands still, eyes locked on the black. He didn't speak, neither did Dralia. Words in this moment felt like disrespect. They had come to end something, or perhaps begin something neither of them could fully name. Engaging final jump. Malik said, the star surround. Althea bent, collapsed, and stretched as the ship transition of gravity twisted in the hull like a hell breath. When they came out, the other Sedethi blackness was deeper than before, not empty, but waiting. Rely stepped forward beside him, pale light casting delicate shadows across her cheekbones. Her white hair had been tied back with a strip of cloth, revealing the faint bioluminescent themes that traveled along her temples. Her violet skin was marked with fading scars, but her eyes, those impossibly bright, piercing eyes, were steady. There, she whispered, pointing. Malik adjusted forward view. At first he saw nothing, just more void than a ripple. Shimmered to crake, crossed the dark like oil on water, a boundary that wasn't a wall, yet somehow reappalled visibility. The sensors stuttered a cloaking veil. He asked, a quantum curtain, Rila replied, projected from within. It folds. Light around the field makes it unreadable to non-native DNA or outdated tech. Malik raised an eyebrow, meaning we just flew into a fortress. Blind Relia nodded. Exactly. He glanced at her. You sure about this? No, she said, but I'm ready. He didn't ask again. The ship slowed, drifting toward the threshold as they crossed the valve. Hole vibrated once, like a deep bell chime from inside the bones of the ship, and silence, and then light. It hit like dawn breaking over a planet that had never seen a sun before them, stretched an impossible expanse, a floating garden beneath a dome of living starlight, trees that shimmered like data pulsostructures, suspended in midair, silver and glass and shadow connected by archways of pure energy. Holographic bridges formed as they stepped forward, unfolding beneath their feet. With each step, rivers of information flowed beneath translucent ground, shifting like a nervous system of a great mind. The eclipsed archive, Relia said, breath-catching. In her throat, Malik said nothing. He didn't have the words. They walked together toward the center, where a structure like a cathedral of light waited, framed by curved monoliths inscribed with unreadable code at its chart, stood a platform hovering slightly off the ground, and on it a pillar of light. A voice spoke, not from any direction, but from within the air itself. Relia. Fear. Last of the Athalori blood-blooded diplomatic class, identity confirmed, sequence complete. Malik stiffened slightly, his hand twitching near his sidearm, but Relia didn't move. Her gaze remained forward. Final encryption. Required memory echo. Relia. Took a breath. I'm ready, Malik. Stepped forward. Wait. What does that mean? She turned to him slowly. It means I must give the archive something no one else can, a memory embedded into my DNA sequence, a piece of my identity, a living key. Once I surrender it, I'll forget it forever. Malik stared at her voice, low-watt memory. She hesitated. My mother's voice, the words hung in the stillness like a funeral bell. She died when I was young, she said, her voice tightening bore. The marriage before everything. I barely remember her face, but I remember her songs, old ones. Ritual hymns from before the Republic. She used to sing tome. At night when I couldn't sleep, when I cried, her voice was the only thing that ever made me feel safe. I've carried it inside me for so long that I didn't even know it was the final cipher. Malik's voice dropped. You don't have to do this, Eyes. I do. Really, she died trying to keep me from becoming someone else's tool. If I don't finish this, everything she gave me dies with me. He clenched his fists. So let me carry it with you. Let me remember it for you. Her eyes softened for the first time. She reached out and took his hand. You already do, she said. Every time you look at me like I matter, every time you treat me like I'm not broken. He looked away. You're not broken. She stepped forward onto the platform's archives. Light surged upward, engulfing her in a beam of pure white. Her body floated an inch off the ground, her hair rising like seaweed in a current. Lines of energy traced her skin, mapping her identity. The glowinton sci-fied Malik stepped back, shielding his eyes. Relia let out a soft gasp, most a sob, but didn't scream. Then silence. The light vanished. She dropped gently back onto the platform, knees buckling slightly. Malik rushed forward, catching her before she hit the ground. Her breath came in short bursts, her eyes swear. Dazed. It's done, she whispered. It took it. The voice returned, no softer, almost reverent. Key received, archive sealed, location access now protected under ancestral authority, unauthorized access protocols in Gadget Final. Data vaults are now locked. No further entry possible. You are free, Malek. Helped her to her feet. What does it mean no one can open it now, she said. Not without Athalari blood, and there's no one left. Not even me. She looked hollow for a moment. Grief, pure and clean, passed through her like a wave. But beneath it, relief. She leaned into Malik's chest and exhaled. For once, there was no pain in the act of closeness. No reflex to shrink away. Just the stillness of being held by someone would never once demanded it. They returned to Althean. Silence. The ship launched without resistance. The archive faded into the background like a dream that knew it had been completed. Back in the cockpit, Relia sat beside him, her face unreadable. I don't remember the song, she said. I do. Malik replied. She turned to him, startled. What, you hummed it once in your sleep. It was soft, high like wind across glass. She swallowed hard. It was beautiful. He said, like you. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. She reached across the space between them, fingers brushing his hand, not seeking comfort this time, sobering it. Thank you, she said. For what? For letting me be more than what I've lost. He laced their fingers together. You were always more. Outside, stars stretched onward. This time they weren't running, they weren't hiding. Thea had made a choice, and it had changed the galaxy, even if no one else ever knew. Relia closed her eyes and smiled, not because she was free, but because she had finally chosen what tobe free for the descent into. Sol Meridian's gravity well was smooth, but silence aboard. Kea felt heavy. Malik's hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, but his eyes flicked toward Rhea more than once. She had spoken much since they left Vaughn Station, since the chase, the data breach. The confirmation that the archive was real and worse, vulnerable. Now they were headed straight toward it, into the center of something ancient and sacred. Relia hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten much either, but she hadn't flinched when he set the course. She had nodded once and said, let's end it. That was the thing about her. Even broken, even hunted, she moved with a kind of quiet authority, not loud, not proud, but earned. Malik had seen plenty of soldiers who fought like machines, and plenty of leaders who barked orders from behind, reinforced walls but Rhea, she had power and she carried it like a wound and right. Now she was sitting beside him, staring at the view below them. The archives emerged, a construct of starlight and memory. It hovered in a fold of reality cloaked from the outside. Galaxy transparent towers spiraled upwards, suspended without support, flickering with ethereal pulses of light beneath them, stretched glowing fields. Almost organic, flowing like rivers of pure Kadethi air, shimmered the very space around it, bent like light refracted through incient glass. Malik exhaled slowly. So this is it. Rella nodded. This is where it ends and begins. They landed gently, the ship stabilizing on a floating platform that unfurled beneath them like a petal in bloom. Rella stood. First, she had braided her hair again, simple, functional, with a strip of dark fabric teeing it off at the base. Her violet skin glowed faintly under the archives. Lithe bioluminescent strands along her temples, pulsing as they responded to the structures. She looked like something's gird-like history, and Malik, for all his grit and scars and soldier's instincts, couldn't look away. She turned to him. Are you coming? He stood slowly, grabbing the pack with emergency tools and the encoded relay transmitter. You really think they'll follow us here? Think Caldrex would follow me to the edge of a black hole if he thought he could drag back something valuable? Malik gave you a dry smile. Then let's make sure he walks into a closed door. They stepped off the ship together. The archive welcomed her. It didn't open so much as respond, recognizing Rhea's presence, her lineage, her purpose. She moved with quiet confidence, guiding Malik across shimmering walkways and floating staircases around them. Ancient, codiformed constellations in the air, rearranging into language he couldn't read. It wasn't just data, it was memory, civilization itself, preserved in crystalline pulses of knowledge. This was never about power, she said, as they reached the central chamber. It was about protection. The archive was created after the fall, the last war of the pre-quantum civilizations. My ancestors weren't warriors. They were keepers, and this was the last thing they chose to keep hidden. Malik stared at the consolarizing from the floor. It pulsed as Rhea stepped forward. I have to give it Thephanol peace, she said. He stepped closer. What does that mean? My last anchor, alive and key, bound to memory. When I give it, it's gone. Malik's throat tightened. Dew already gave it something once. Don't I want to? She interrupted gently. Because it's time. It's my choice. She turned to him. I've spent my whole life being Usadone, told who I had to be. This is mine, and no one can take it. He didn't try to stop her again. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, her fingers curled around as instinctively, no hesitation, no fear. When she stepped onto the archivist's core platform, the light surged. Her body rose in the air, a slow drift as Thurchiv read her fully. Symbols encircled her like a storm. Her family, her caste, her decisions, her failures, her survival, all of it rewritten into legacy. Malaquad's breath held, then the light dimmed. She landed on her feet, swaying heck at her before she could fall. It's done, she whispered. A voice rang out, gentle but absolute. A clipped archive locked. No further access. All data buried. Genetic tether removed. Last of the bloodline discharged. Malik tightened his arms around her. What does that mean? She exhaled shakily. It means I'm no longer the key. I'm just me. She looked up at him then, and something cracked open in her expression. Something soft, fragile, real. I don't remember her voice, she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. My mother, the song she used to sing, it's gone. Millet cupped her face gently. You gave it to protect everything, he said, but I'll remember you always, no matter what. His thumb brushed her cheek and she leaned forward. The kiss wasn't dramatic, it wasn't desperate, it was quiet, unspoken, earned. She kissed him like someone who had waited a lifetime to be touched without being owned, like someone learning how to want again, not from survival, but from choice. He responded, inking carefully with reverence. Like she might break, but more than that, like she'd survived to be cherished. When they pulled apart, she didn't look away. I don't know what comes next, she said. Malik's smiled forehead resting against hers. Then we find out together. They've stood there For a while, hands intertwined, the archive pulsing quietly around them, content. Now, as if it understood that the legacy it had protected for millennia was in good hands. Later, as Althea lifted from the platform, Relia looked down one final time. The archive faded into the black seal behind her. No longer her burden, no their prison. Just her past. She turned to Malik, who was already watching her. "I want to build something," she said softly. "Something that's mine. Ours." He nodded. "You already are." And for the first time since her world had shattered, she believed him. The sun on Kalis 12 rose slow and golden, filtering through the high cloud banks like a silk curtain. Pulled across a sleeping face, Althea rested on the outskirts of a quiet frontier town nestled between terrace hills and wind-powered energy farms. No alarms, no lockdowns, no trace signal shemming in the distance, just wind chimes, alien birdsong, and the soft hiss off morning steam from the nearby geothermal vents. It had been 94 days since the archive was sealed, since the hunt ended, since Rhea had finally stopped running. Cabin was small, repurposed from a storage pod. Malik had reinforced and outfitted himself, but it felt more permanent than anything she'd ever lived in. Vines are beginning to creep along outer rails. Inside, the floor was clean. The air smelled faintly of dried herbs, and Malik had left fresh fruit and black siaf on the table beside a half-disassembled radio unit. Relia stood barefoot in the doorway, sunlight spilling across her face and shoulders. Her hair was longer now, looser shetten, keep tied back as much. The scars along her collarbone had faded her skin. A deep lilac in the golden hour sure, a simple wrapped tunic and loose pants, both of which she'd chosen herself. There was no symbol on them, no sigil, just fabric comfort. She closed her eyes and breathed a full breath deep, without fear, from behind. A familiar presence moved. Malik wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her gently against his chest, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You always find a sunrise," he murmured. She leaned into him. "It always finds me." His lips brushed the side of her neck. "I made breakfast, but I burned the eggs, so I pretended it was intentional." Shellowed freely now, with sound and no shame. "I still remember the first time you offer me food," she said. "I was terrified. You'd stab me. You didn't look it. I'm very good at pretending." She turned, his arms looping hers around his neck. His hair had grown out a little, no longer the strict military short style he'd worn before. His beard was soft. Earth lines around his eyes hadn't disappeared, but they were no longer hardened by regret. They were softened by days like this. "I don't want to pretend anymore," she whispered. He tilted his head about how "I feel when I look at you." Malik's brow furrowed slightly, the way it always did when he was caught off guard. She loved that this man would taken on bounty hunters and smugglers and a dying empire, still didn't quite know what to do with tenderness. "Malik Jarrow," she said, her voice steadier than it had ever been. "I love, though." The silence that followed was soft, sacred. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. Hedges smiled slowly, quietly, then touched her cheek with one calloused hand, thumb brushing the edge of her jaw. "I love you too," he said. "I think I did the moment you sat in my chair and told me I wasn't scary." She kissed him. Then it was different this time. Not stolen in the heat of battle, not offered like an apology. Not driven by adrenaline or fear, but still certain. She kissed him because wanted to, because the future no longer frightened her, because love no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like gravity. Quiet, constant, always there. They've stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, while the sunlight warmed the deck beneath their feet and the planet turned slowly beneath them. Later that day, they planted fruit vines behind the cabin. Relia laughed when Malik tripped over a root and landed in the soil. He threw a handful of dirt at Hirsch, hit him with a watering hose, and that night, lying together in their cot beneath the sky full of stars neither of them had to run from, she whispered again, "I love you." Malik pulled her close, kissed the inside of her wrist, and replied like it was the easiest truth in the universe, "And I'll love you tomorrow too." The past was behind them. The archive was sealed. The galaxy would spin on Butfer. Now here on a world with no war and no chains. Relia and Malik had found what so few ever did, a life, and in that life, each other.